Welcome to today's episode of Resiliency The Podcast. I am your host, Jenn Quader. I'm a global strategic communications expert and CEO of a PR firm called The Smart Agency. I am joined as always by our illustrious co-host, Dr. Kelly Culver. Now, Dr. Culver is a renowned global leader. She has more than 3 decades of experience as a director, an entrepreneur, a strategist, an executive coach, and she's our resident doctor of resilience. Welcome, Dr. Culver. Happy to have you always.
Thank you.
Now, today, our listeners are in for something so educational, so important, and we're very honored to have today's guest. And I want to start off today's show with a disclaimer. So today's show is not financial advice. We are not financial advisors. And even though that's right, thank you, Dr. Kelly. But even though today's guest is a financial advisor, he recommends finding a trusted financial advisor to work directly with you and your money. Now, with that out of the way, I could drum roll this guy, you guys. It's really, really amazing. Our guest today is the founding partner of Trinity Investors. It's a private equity firm. It started in 1999. Now, he leads the investment committee and the leadership team for Trinity, and he's also the lead partner on several of Trinity's investments, and that means he's got skin in the game. He's an investor as well as an advisor. Now, Trinity's current portfolio is valued at over $6.9 billion. That includes 17 operating companies and over 145 real estate holdings. And to date, Trinity's all-time distributions to their investors is valued at $1.28 billion. Guys, we have a ton to learn. I am really, really excited to welcome Mr. Dan Meader of Trinity Investors. Welcome, Dan. How are you today?
Wow. I'm overwhelmed, Jen and Kelly. I will tell you that. I need you all to come hang out with me more often. No, thank you first of all, thank you for having me. It's always special to be able to talk about something that I have a passion for and investing and how to invest properly and appropriately is something that I think we should all think about more than we do. So it's great to be with you all this afternoon.
What an honor. And I do have to ask, how'd I do on my disclaimer, Dan? You know, you're the expert here.
You did great with the exception of our standard rule, which is past performance does not reflect future resulls, right?
Amen. Past performance does
so
not reflect future results.
Yeah, that's right. That's another way of saying we all wake up every day trying to learn more.
It's this topic is really near and dear to our hearts, and we're taking it out on sort of a slightly different trajectory when we talk about, we're going to learn a lot from you around financial resilience, financial literacy. But if you could maybe get us started, what does the word resiliency mean to you?
Resiliency is a very simple word for me. It means long-term investing. One of the things that I am passionate about is, there is no silver bullet in the marketplace. I think at times people are quick to believe that, hey, there's an opportunity here. There's a grossly misvalued asset, right? I mean, I think generally when you hear what I call the fish stories, right? Somebody says, oh, I bought this stock for 2 and it went to 200 or whatever. What they really don't talk about is the fact that the markets are reasonably efficient. What do we mean by efficient? That means that there's enough buyers and sellers around most types of investments, so that if something was mispriced, even a little bit, let alone dramatically, that then someone would take advantage of that. The market would correct, meaning there would be more capital flowing from one direction to the other. So I do want to say that to me, resiliency means long-term investing. But having said that, I want to start with one of my first wonderful questions for this afternoon, which is, what are the 3 most important words in the capital markets? The 3 most important words in the capital markets. And I want our listeners to remember this. If nothing more, I want you to remember these 3 words. Are you ready, ladies?
Yeah.
I'm so ready.
It feels like a test. I'm ready.
At what price?
At what price?
So let's put it to work. Dan.
Yeah, okay.
Do you like Apple? At what price?
At what price?
Dan, do you like real estate? At what price? What should I be in gold? At what price? So one of the things we have to really start to add to any discussion around resiliency and longer term investing is really, what are our investment goals? Right? Is our goal to for storage of value? Do we want to buy something that we want to own for 50 years? Is it something that we want to buy for 2 weeks? I mean, obviously there's a lot of activity in the stock market. There's day traders. There's all those kinds of things. But as investors, we want to take a deep breath. Remember, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the three most important words we always want to ask: at what price?
What a brilliant, they say that brilliance lies in simplicity, and truly so simple and so clear, because one of the things we talk about a lot here at Resiliency, the podcast, is that really resilience is a lot about navigating change. It's navigating things that move all the time. And so at what price allows you to pinpoint through that change and then to make decisions that are relevant to it. And I love that you mentioned storage of value. I'd like to get into that. One of the things, though, that I think that I really, and Dan and I had a chance to talk, obviously, before we got on the podcast, and I was really struck by how personally connected you are to those who invest with your company, and how you see your company as really a catalyst to help families to be able to create and protect their own wealth. So there's probably a lot of families listening, probably a lot of parents. How would you get a family started on the concept of wealth creation?
No, that's great. So let's break that down into a couple of different subtopics. One of them is obviously family, which generally goes with the word dysfunction. And
yes,
and the other word or phrase, is wealth creation, right? And so let's start maybe the second topic a little bit easier. So there's the concept of wealth preservation, which really means how do we just maintain value, right, against inflation or against changes in currency values and other things, as opposed to wealth creation, right? And if you remember, particularly in the American culture, and I know we have some international listeners, but in the American culture, there's only two things over the last 260 years that have really shown the ability to create wealth over time. Okay, not preserve wealth, but create wealth. And those are ownership of real estate and ownership of closely held companies, or what many people call family businesses. Okay. So as we think about all different kinds of assets, and obviously we have new assets like cryptocurrencies that have come on, but if you look sort of over time and over the history of capitalism or civilization, the two realities that we see over and over again is real estate, and it could be residential, like your home. It could be land. It could be commercial real estate. And certainly we see a lot of capital flow in and out of commercial real estate. Let's go back to the first topic, which is family, functional, dysfunctional. I think probably what is most important is it starts at the kitchen table. I have two adult children. I have a 28-year-old daughter, 26-year-old son. And for whatever reason, we started talking about wealth preservation, or, how the capital markets work, early on, right? And, some people start with a lemonade stand. Other people start with the concept of a savings account or an allowance. I don't know if you remember, but I got an allowance, and I was always trying to get more of allowance, So the concept of wealth really starts with sort of the concept of money and how do we use money. And so you had asked me to consider some books that I'd like readers to consider. One of my favorite, really, I think this is foundational. It's a book that came out, at least 10 years ago. It's called The Psychology of Money. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And Morgan is really an interesting guy. He's written more than one book, but this particular book, The Psychology of Money, does a fantastic job of making it sort of a layman's discussion. Okay. And really it says, what role does money play? People have varieties of roles and varieties of perceptions around money, the use of it, the storage of it, the perceptions around, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And I think it starts by saying, hey, money's not a bad thing. Money's a tool. Money's a commodity. But how do we, as individuals, how do we as a family approach money, right? And I think ultimately what I find fascinating about families is that they put money in the category of politics and sex, which means you don't really talk about it unless you have to. And if you have to, you really don't say what you mean. And I really don't want people to do that. Money, wealth creation, how the capital markets work. You have to have open conversations about that. I have a lot of clients with adult children, well educated, went to some of the best schools here in this country. And I say, do you talk to your kids about wealth creation? Do your kids know what a good investment looks like? Do your kids have a sense of how to build an investment portfolio? And they just like, no, I just want to make sure my kid pays his credit card bill, right? I'm still trying to get my kid off my cell phone plan. So I think that we have to be realistic, that it starts by saying, what are our baseline perceptions of money and wealth? Then, to the extent we want to start to have conversations with our children, our adult children, whatever, you got to do it early and you got to do it often.
Well, I was just going to jump in and ask both of your permission to spin off what Dan has just said about family and these discussions about money with family. If you'll indulge me for a minute, because I've got two examples. I grew up on a farm, and we talked about money all the time because it was, what are the crops bringing in? How are we doing things? How are we making investments? And my grandparents, my mom's parents, were from Northern Ireland. They came over as young people to Canada. And my Nana took me into a bank when I was 16, and she deposited $100 into a bank account, which she transferred over to me. And she said, I want you to promise me you'll make a monthly contribution to this for the rest of your life, even if it's just $10 a month. When you go to work, maybe you can increase that. That was a long time ago, as you can tell by the color of my hair. And that bank account, which is now, it's an investment, is really substantial. It was really great advice. And the other story is my husband passed away. And before that happened, we had a long conversation with our two adult sons about money, investments, inheritance. And we were never afraid to talk about what we might call the big, dead, ugly, stinky moose that was sitting in the middle of the table. And we normalized it.
So can I tell you a quick story about this that dovetails on what Kelly said? So, I started Trinity in May of 1999. I put the dog outside when I'm making phone calls. I literally started on my kitchen table. And so my son, Zach, he's 26 now, but when he was five, it was take your son to work day. All right. I'm like, oh man, this is going to be just a interruption. I'm not a fireman. I'm not an astronaut. It's one of these things where, so one of the things that it was this experience that taught me this, Kelly. But I remember, I would come home. When you work for yourself, you have good days and bad days, right? And I remember I would come home every once in a while, and we'd sit down at our kitchen table, and something to the effect, my wife would say, "Well, how's your day?" And I'd say, "Yeah, we made some money today," right? It was just an expression for we had a pretty good day. I mean, again, it's a little company, and some days you make money, some days you don't. So anyway, my 5-year-old son, he has his little briefcase, I remember he wants to put a little clip-on tie. And of course, my wife has pictures, all this. So he comes to my office, right? So of course, I'm just like, there's the candy jar over there. Let's just, I'd already negotiated with my wife that she's going to come pick him up in like 90 minutes, right? That we're not to do. And we need to make some money today, right? So anyway, right. Zach has some paper. So I'm handing him some paper and some crayons and stuff. And so he goes and sits at the table, and he goes to work, right? And he's looking at down his paper, and he's drawing some stuff. So, I call him Z-Man. His name's Zach. I call him Z-Man. So I said, "Hey, Z-Man, you work pretty hard there. What are you doing?" And he looks up at me and he goes, "Dad, I'm making some money." And he had drawn little squares, and he was drawing with green, and what else would a 5-year-old think, right? I mean, when I sit down, I'm at my dad's office, I'm going to make some money. So just remember, everybody comes from a different place when you start talking about money.
It's so wholesome, it really is. And I think that's what's so interesting, because in this same world, there's this wholesomeness of both stories. Kelly, you're talking about continuing a family, which is what we have to do because we do lose people. And how do we continue them? And then Dan, you're talking about starting someone, at 5 years old, how you see that. And I think it's fascinating because it takes me back to what you said, Dan. You said that families put money in the category of politics and sex. And what that means is that they don't say what they mean. And I think it's really interesting. And so I want to point us towards something that you actually said to me. I thought it was a really good quote, and I want to share it with our listeners and ask if you can kind of help them to understand this a bit. You said to me, when speaking about parents and their kids, your 25 is not their 25. So there's a big generational difference. We all know this with the discussions of Gen Z and generational wealth. So when you're looking at a family with this kind of dynamic, how do you help someone to talk about and say what they mean? And again, to your point, it's at what price? So that means it's changing all the time. How do you help someone learn how to say what they mean around money, knowing that their 25 is not their child's 25?
Yeah, so and I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think as particularly as we get older, our perceptions about the world changes, and certainly our perceptions about money change. And I think as a 62-year-old man, for me to go and talk to my 26-year-old son about money, I can't be 26, right? When I was 26, if I had $100 in my pocket, I felt wealthy, right? And so I think that I just don't think it's reasonable for there to be a bridge like, hey, Zach, you need to save money, you need to have 6 months of savings, da 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 da. There's sort of basic principles. Kelly, I was thinking about your grandmother and the concept of compounding, right? That the eighth wonder of the world is compounding. And what she was really saying is that no matter what, savings is good and compounding is better, right? So I think probably what we have to do is, if we're going to talk to our kids about money, we have to start by saying, don't start by telling them what they should think. Start by asking them what they think. See, it's not about, hey, let's both agree on how much you're going to save every month. That is not the purpose of the discussion. The purpose of the discussion is to help them better understand their perception of it, their use of it. And I think a lot of parents will understand what I mean when I say this. I have one child, and I won't use their names, obviously. I have one child that's a spender, and I have one child that's a saver. That's just their nature. That's their nature.
Me too.
So what do I do, right? When I talk to my spender, I talk about consumption and caps. And when I talk to my saver, I talk about investing, and let's not be so bearish on the world. So personality plays a big role here in how people look at this kind of stuff.
Dan, you're talking to something that's really fascinating to me in the world of resilience. And that is, and we talk about it a lot here, like, it's not just created of you, it is also coming from others. And what you're talking about is listening, and it's such a core tenet of leadership, of good leadership. And you're someone who leads at a big level. And so I'm interested in, when you say, don't tell them what to think, ask them what to think. I find that so fascinating. Can you speak to then how we're talking about family and about creation of wealth. How do you then get people to look at that preservation, at that compounding, at that growth of wealth, and have a better taste in their mouth for it?
Okay, so again, let's talk a little bit more about preservation of capital. We touched on the concept of wealth creation versus wealth preservation. I actually think the best way to talk about wealth preservation is talk about cars, right? So one of the things that generally comes up somewhere between some age and another age is, hey, I want a car, I want to buy a car, I want to have a car. And so then the question becomes, who's going to pay for the car, right? I know that's a crazy idea. And then somebody always says, who's going to pay for the insurance, the gas, and da-da-da-da-da-da, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with a concept that let's not confuse consumption with investments, right? Because I think, and this is really where I wish people would think more about this, but borrowing money to buy a car is really not a good idea. And let's think about that. Let's unpack that. I mean, a car is a liability. A car is a depreciating asset. Now, obviously, there's Porsches and there's Ferraris, McLarens. There's certain kinds of cars that you could say, oh, damn, there's a classic car. But I'm saying for just transportation, the idea is that that cars depreciate, they become worth less and less and less and less. So if we're trying to be thoughtful about money, why would we borrow money to buy something that's going to be worth less and less and less and less, right? The concept is if we're going to employ leverage, and leverage is its own concept, you're employing leverage to buy something that's going to make more and more, worth more and more and more and more. So I think that when we start to sort of break down and say, well, what's wealth creation and what's wealth preservation, I think we have to start by saying, hey, listen, the reality of a car is it's cost per mile, right? It's a luxury. We can take the bus, we can walk, ride our bikes. But at the end of the day, we should approach transportation and say it's a cost per mile. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a loan to buy a car or use lease. I lease cars because I don't like to own cars. I don't like to own things that are worth less. I like to own things that are worth more. So I think ultimately it's reframing your thinking around sort of how the world works versus how you should look. Now, there's books like The Millionaire Next Door, and there's other books that talk about savings, and they talk about consumption and this idea that you want to save more than you consume. And then that's like diet. The one thing that cracks me up about diets is it's real simple. If you consume more calories than you burn, you get bigger, right? Same thing. If you save more than you spend, then your bank account gets bigger. It's real simple math. So back to your point about wealth creation and wealth, really sort of preserving wealth. I think it's important that we say, okay, transportation is important, it's consumption, but can we start, and I like Kelly's concept, can we start with savings? Can we start with simple investing? Can we start with the idea that over the next 5 years, we want to have a savings goal, we want to have an investment goal? And again, the concept being that it's not going to happen overnight, but it gets us down the path of wealth creation, right? And really, and it's interesting, it goes back to nature. There's, I had a paper route when I was a kid, right? I always wanted to have some money in my pocket, right? Because it's part of my self-worth, I guess. But from an early age, I was like, how do I turn a dollar into two? How do we sort of make something happen here? And everybody's not built that way. And I think if people are more conservative or they're concerned or less comfortable talking about money, then let's just get them on that savings, slow investing path. Every path doesn't have to be the same here to get people into the wealth creation and preservation business.
I want to repeat that. Every path does not have to be the same to get people into the wealth creation and preservation business. That's hugely insightful for me, Dan, because I think there's a lot of societal groupthink that says there's one way to the top, and I think that it's really interesting. I wonder if you would dive for just a minute more, because this is a new concept for me, on a concept you call storage of value. And can you explain that concept and help people to understand what is a storage of value opportunity? How do they find that? What is that? What are they looking for with regard to that?
All right. So first of all, I got to tell you another story. Is that okay? Is it right if I tell you?
Please, we love stories.
You bet.
And Dan Meader's stories are the best stories. So we're ready.
All right. So one of the classic questions in my business, right, is if you could only own one thing, what would it be? Right. So I've invested in a lot of things over the last 40 years, and some of them have been good and some of them not so good, but I've actually put a lot of thought. And if I could only own one thing, what would it be? And I've decided, and I'm here to announce today on this show, that if I could only own one thing, it would be the landfill in Okeechobee, Florida.
Okay, why? Explain yourself.
Just real.
I love this.
Just real simple. All right. So one thing that cracks me up about the media at times is these concepts that we're going to run out of landfills, right? Because I'm just telling you right now that if you just went to Indiana and you dug a hole 1 mile each way, 1 mile deep, you could take all the trash America does. Anyway, so the concept is that no one wants a landfill next to their house.
Yeah.
No one wants a prison next to their house. No one wants a landfill next to their house, right? So one of the realities is that waste hauling is about shipping. It's about cost per mile, right? And so the reality is that if you have a landfill and there's no other landfills close, and nobody wants to let a landfill open up next door, then if you have something that's geographically protected and really is not subject to obsolescence, victory, baby. So from my
So it's
perspective,
like a scarcity thing. You're employing the scarcity principle.
Gets back to what retains value over time. Now, let me just say, financial assets generally depreciate with inflation, right? Inflation is insidious. We don't like inflation. The Fed is built to protect us against inflation. But, real estate over time generally stores value, right? So let's go back to Kelly's example. I mean, farmers generally, they like to have farm ground. One example, I got clients in Iowa, and it's not farmland, it's farm ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's farm ground. And so some people think storage of value could be in land, which I think it could be. I think some people think storage of value could be in certain kind of commodities. You have things that are called royalty interest, where people will own minerals, right? One of the unique things about the United States is that private people can own minerals. You can't do that in most of the world. So some people think minerals. Some people think concepts like gold or other things. I'm not trying to advocate for a one specific asset. I'm trying to say, if you want to own something for 50 years, what would it look like, and what is it about that asset is going to make it worth something for 50 years? I want to go back to you, Kelly. One of the things that you learn about Canadians is that they all have a lake house, or they have some kind of a house on some some lake that nobody knows the name of, but if you think
Lake
about it,
Erie?
there you
Have
go.
you ever heard of Lake Erie?
But at the end of the day, a resort property could be worth. I mean, it may not be. It's storage of value, right? I mean, the idea of it's not just storage of value; it's a storage of memories, right? And so if you keep going to a place, and you keep going to a place, then the value of that little cabin economically may depreciate a little bit, but in terms of its value to the family, it maintains itself time after time after time. I really think, particularly in a world that continues to be more isolating, I think it's important for people to really start to talk about, where can we go manufacture memories? Where can we go gather? Which is another book that I love. It's a book I just recently came across about how to gather and how to gather more successfully. But I really want people to add to their storage of value equation. How does this help us build memories, build connectivity to what we want our family to be?
You're teaching us that things, about assets, if we use the word assets, and it isn't just money. Assets can be things, but assets can be people. And you've helped people through sort of generational turnover, generational change. And I think that's a great piece of advice to anybody listening, is that some of our best assets are the memories that we have, or the memories we choose to make with people who matter. It's priceless.
Yeah. And as a capitalist, and I am a capitalist, I'm not here to say, oh, let's get super sappy and, think about the listen, I want people to store value in things that appreciate, not just hold value. But when you get into these 50-year discussions or 25-year discussions, if you don't take into account your values and your connections with people that matter to you, then you're being foolish.
Well, and beyond that, it matters to every part of your life, which is what I'm hearing. And I mean, I myself am a capitalist. I believe in the power of compounding. I believe that a lot of that comes from the infrastructure that has been placed, into our economic world. But I'm interested in kind of this emotional aspect of money. I think that's a huge part of money. And there's certainly the emotional aspect of the stress of a scarcity mindset. But then there's this beautiful emotional aspect where you're talking about, when you are strategically planning to use your money, think about the memories you're going to make with the people you love. Now, that brings me to another question that we have, but it's really an interesting one, because as you think about that, it ties back to you talking about how a lot of families don't really talk about money. And the question is, why, when in order to make that money, you told that story about Z-Man coming to your office at age 5, and you said that you'd come home and you were working really hard and you'd say, we make some money today. But you were working really hard. Why are we so uncomfortable talking about money when we all work so hard?
Oh, well, that's simple. Because money is keeping score, right? I mean, ultimately, if you think about the way our culture works. Why do people buy Porsches when they can, buy Hondas? Well, because it becomes a part of their personal brand, and it becomes a part of who they want people to see them as, or to remember them for. So I think that the uncomfortableness around money is really more about sort of how does it build into who you want people to see you, and how you want to be perceived. And listen, we need to be direct about this. People that are financially successful carry a higher status. They carry people look up to people that create wealth. And I'm not discouraging anyone from having, making money as a goal in life. I just think that you can't let it consume you. Here's another number. I'm a numbers guy. So another number that I want people to remember is 78,000. That generally in this culture, inflation adjusted, once you make about $78,000 a year, your basic needs are met. Now I'm talking if you have student loans or this or that, but once you sort of get to that level, then above that, it's like, well, do I want a nicer car, or do I want to live in a nicer house, or do I want to travel more, or maybe wear a nicer set of clothes? But sort of in that Maslow's hierarchy of needs concept, being able to sort of get through life and survive is not a huge amount of money. Now, I don't want to belittle the fact that there are a lot of people that have to live and learn to live on less than that. But I think probably what makes money so uncomfortable is how it forces people to say, how is money going to define who I am and how I want people to see me. And I think that's really the decision you've got to make, which is, okay, do I want to drive a fancy car? Do I want to be seen as someone that's financially successful? We learn this in elementary school, right? People that are jerks, people that treat people poorly, whether they're rich or poor, they're jerks, right? And I think that we have to make sure that our desires to sort of be more financially successful don't necessarily change who we are, right? There's an expression that I'm sure maybe heard, that money changes the man. Money changes the man or the woman. But I would say, yeah, definitely. Certainly liquidity events do. I absolutely believe that money can change the man. But I think if you think about it and you worry about it, right? What's that old phrase? Why do we wear our seatbelts every day? Right? Because we live in fear of the accident, right? We wear our seatbelts every day in fear of the accident, because really, if we knew the day we were having the accident, like, I'm going to have an accident if I wear my seatbelt, right? That doesn't work. If we live in fear that money will change us negatively, then we're going to be fine. Let's wear our seatbelt every day. Let's remember that money can and might change our perceptions of who we are and how we interact with the world. But if we say, hey, come on, let's not let that happen, then I think we'll be okay. And that certainly has been my personal experience. I think for the people that I find that have accumulated wealth, but still in my mind think are living successfully and living happily, it's because they haven't let that the money or the consumption or the brand building, they haven't let it affect who they want to be.
I mean, look, there's so many ways to take that, because immediately I see the Kardashians in my head. You know what I mean? Like, that's an American staple of like money that is a brand. And so I think that what you're giving is the opposite of that. And I'm really attracted to that, which is to say, like, you can make money decisions and you can have plenty of money, and it is your choice or any individual's choice whether or not they want to use that to define themselves as a brand. What do you, I'm going to throw one in on you, Dan, because you're so good. As you know, it's an easy talk back and forth. But my question is, like, what do you think of Gen Z? What do you think of this generation who is bombarded with this money as status, drive these cars, do these things? Generationally, how are they looking at money, and where could they improve?
Well, a couple of things there. First of all, I have a Gen Z child, so I caveat this by saying obviously I'm going to be biased sort of by the experiences I've had with him and with his friends. Generally, I think what comes with all these various choices and various temptations is a greater knowledge, right? I think Gen Z generation is probably smarter than my generation. Certainly, when you ask me to find something on my phone, you'll see that in spades. But I don't necessarily think that any particular generation has more of a challenge to deal with money or the use of money than any other challenge. I mean, people left Northern Ireland because they were starving, right? I mean, one of the ways you don't have to worry about money is when you have none, right? So, so there's all different sort of generational realities that shape people's perception of wealth, success, and money. I would say from a Gen Zer's perspective, what I find is that they're valuing their time more than their money. And I think that's something that I struggle with as a business owner. I have a lot of Gen Z employees, and I'm like, what do you mean you're leaving at 5 o'clock today? Right. So I have to be careful here because, this sort of the concept that we're all going to grind together doesn't go as far as it used to.
No, it doesn't.
Well, and Dan, you've hit a key point of why truly, honestly, Kelly Culver, Jenn Quader, why we're sitting here making Resiliency the podcast, because whether it's Gen Z or any generation, there is a little like over societal feeling of like, why do we have to work so hard? And I think that there's a real answer to why we have to work so hard. And it is in the grind is what gets us to the benefits. So if I ask you that, Dan, why do we have to work so hard? What are the benefits of all of this wealth creation and preservation? Tell us the benefits of what happens when you put that shoulder to the wheel and do the work.
Well, I guess for me, it's a little bit easier maybe than others, because if you love what you do, then it's not really work, right? I mean, I guess I have a passion for what I do. I'm a chartered financial analyst. I'm a CPA. I mean, I like numbers. I like to know how much things cost. I'm just going to give one more anecdote, just because I'm idiosyncratic and you invited me on the show.
We love it.
When I walk into a restaurant, this drives my wife crazy. When I walk into a restaurant, I build an income statement, right? I count the number of seats. I estimate the average ticket. I say, okay, I think they're going to do about $4,000 a shift. Labor's going to cost that. I think he walks lunch today with $1,200 in his pocket.
You can't help yourself, can you?
That's what I do. I mean, why shouldn't we estimate how much a guy made on the lunch shift today? So if we can go to what we like, if we can go to what we enjoy, then I mean, there are days when I don't particularly like what I have to do at the office, but ultimately it goes back to your definition of work, right? I mean, I think this is really important. I think this is probably one of the most important things we want to convey, is that if you find yourself really bogged down with work this, work that, it really goes to what I think is an incongruity in your life, which is either A, you're doing something that you don't like. Okay, why is that, right? First real simple rule is the reason that people get paid a lot of money is either they could do something that other people can't do, or they could do something that other people won't do, right? Those are the real simple reasons why people make more money. So if you're sitting there saying to yourself, I hate my job, I'm not making any money, then I think you got to unpack that and say, well, what would I like to do? And could I get paid more for what I like to do? And work is relative, right? I mean, I enjoy my work, right? I like my clients. I like the opportunity to make investments, but ultimately, I just like what I do. I think that's important.
And
people ask that question. Do I like what I do?
Yeah.
Well, and you like it so much that you do it at the restaurant. Like that's what I love is it's a passion. You have found the thing that bubbles. You found the thing that gives you momentum. And I think that speaks to a lot of resilience. But then also I heard you say, and I think this is something I like to say a lot to people, is like, it ain't all fun. Even if you're working in your passion, work is work is work. Work is tough. And so you do have to go through those days that are tough, and you have to find your grit, and you have to, as Dr. Kelly likes to say, put on your pants of steel and get up in the morning and do that work. But it sounds like the benefit is a lot more stability and security within that family unit, as dysfunctional as it may be, but security in knowing you can make those memories and you can, grow your family in the way that you would like.
So I'm going to bring it back to resiliency, right? Because as my podcast, it's very important that we come back to that, because really and truly, let's look at it this way.
I love it.
I'm a Dan fan.
If you like what you're doing and you're not yet making enough, be resilient to stick with it. And if you don't like what you're doing, then have the courage and resiliency to go find something that doesn't feel as much like work.
Amen. That is true resiliency. True resiliency is being able, I think, to exactly what you said, like walk through it if it's right for you, or jump out of it if it's not. And either way, it takes bravery, it takes courage. But I agree. And I think that's a huge part of why we have these conversations and why, Dan, you're such a great guest to have, because money is something that touches every part of our life. I will be honest, I cried to my husband about money this morning. I was like, we're talking about money, and I'm crying this morning because money is emotional. It feels, and I loved what you said earlier, it's keeping score. It feels like you're keeping score. I think what I want to ask before we get into the really fun part of our show, which is moving into kind of the rapid questions, because you as a wonderful as part of the Resiliency the Podcast family, you brought it back to resiliency. So I want to ask, you've given us a lot of amazing stories, some really cool like sayings that I'm going to write on Post-it notes and put up on my wall. But as someone who, again, your company has $6.9 billion in assets, you've given out $1.28 billion in distributions to investors. So now I want to ask for some resiliency advice. We asked you how you defined it. You've talked through kind of the mechanics of the money part. But to someone who this morning was feeling this stress of money, and yet I want to be resilient, what's your advice on how to be resilient when it comes to a money mindset?
No, that's simple. Let's go back to numbers. 613. 6 months of savings. Got to have 6 months of savings, right? If we're struggling for grocery money, it's you're in a different world, right? I mean, 6 months savings, 6 months of expenses in savings. 1, we set our financial goals once a year, right? What do we want to what's our savings goal for the year? The world changes, life changes, everything changes. But every year we should go in and say, okay, what's my goal for savings this year? Maybe what's my budget? I'm a big fan of personal budgets. And then 3 is every 3 years you really have to say, am I making progress, right? It kind of gets back to financial planning and working with a financial professional that, this idea that we get up and I'm going to start saving today, and all this and that. That's noble. It's wonderful. But 613. I wish I knew the area code for 613 because that would help us remember it.
Ottawa.
Boom.
Ottawa, Canada.
Oh,
bring it back to Canada. Nice.
Oh, yeah. Ottawa.
613.
Eastern Ontario is 613.
Hey, real quick, I want to pitch 2 quick books. One of the other books, I was talking earlier about cars and cost per mile. There's a great book that I found, and it's hard to find because it's I actually have to buy these when I can. It's called Too Much of a Good Thing. It's about how to raise your children and think more about money. It's by a guy named Dan Kindlon, Kindlon. Too Much of a Good Thing by Dan Kindlon, Kindlon. It's hard to find. It's not, but what is it really goes right at how do we teach our kids? And it talks about putting a contract with your kid together when you get a car. Great stuff. And the last thing, and I love this book. I love Michael Lewis. We love Michael Lewis.
Yes, we love Michael Lewis.
We love Michael
The Big
Lewis.
Short, Liar, Liar.
Love him. But his first book, Liar's Poker, is my favorite. And here's why. Not only because generally first books are kind of the best if people are good at their craft, but it talks about the capital markets, right? So we've talked about money and preservation, but kind of funds flow and Wall Street and how does Wall Street work? He tells some great stories. I mean, I'm a huge fan of everything Michael Lewis writes, but go back to Liar's Poker. He wrote it in the late 80s, early 90s, but it introduces you to Wall Street, some concepts and some ideas. I don't know. I just think Michael Lewis is fabulous. Read everything, but go back to his first book. Got to go back to his first book.
Every book
Amazing.
Michael Lewis has ever read is that you just read his whole portfolio because he's one of my favorite authors on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got a question for you, and it might push us over the time limit. We allocate 60 minutes, but I got to do it.
Fast.
I got to do it. So you gave us the number 613, and I, as a Canadian, I want to ask you about the number 4.
Okay.
So we're recording this episode at the end of October. And as people are listening to us, your country is in the middle of the U.S. presidential election and hasn't yet been decided. So, what role does politics play in wealth creation? Then we'll move into our rapid fire question.
Yeah, you know what? I do appreciate you bringing this up, and I know that I'm speaking before the election, and people are going to hear this after. The answer is that I'm agnostic to politics. What I care a lot about is taxes, right? I mean, obviously, tax efficiency is important. Municipal bonds are obviously a classic example of that. Obviously, 401ks or other kinds of savings accounts that defer taxes are always a good thing. So I would say that it's most important as we continue to think about wealth and build wealth that tax efficiency becomes important. And so we want to pay attention to that. What I have found historically in my 40 years of voting is that neither party really wants to do anything more than tax and spend. So I think we just need to watch taxes regardless about who wins.
Yeah, tax and spend as opposed to growth and innovation, because that's different.
Can be.
Yeah.
We want our portfolios to grow and be innovative.
Correct.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Are we ready, Jenn?
I'm ready for rapid.
Okay.
Dan, are you
Let's do
ready
this.
for rapid?
I'm always ready. I was born ready.
He's always ready for rapid. It's true. We can tell. It's
born
awesome.
ready.
I do want to say real quick, I wanted to just let our listeners know, because Dan has mentioned several wonderful books on this episode. They will be in the show notes. And then I just want to say to Dan before we go into rapid fire that it's a really cool example of what a good and resilient leader is, to have so many other books that you look to be constantly learning. So I always like to remind our audience, constant learning is a beautiful way to find resilience. Now, rapid fire questions with Dr. Callie Culver. Let's do it.
What's your favorite movie or TV show that makes you feel resilient?
Oh, that was simple. Andy Dufresne from Shawshank Redemption. Without exception. Stephen King wrote the novella. Tim Robbins. Oh, my gosh. Go watch that movie tonight. You can't beat it.
I agree. It's a classic. Classic.
Yep. How about your favorite song that makes you feel resilient?
I thought a lot about this one. And this cracked me up. I was talking to one of my Gen Z assistants. And
she didn't know the band.
So I think I don't know if she's Canadian. Alanis Morissette?
Yeah, she's Canadian.
So anyways.
It's from Ottawa. From the 613 area code.
She has a song called Ironic.
Yes, she does.
I love that song. And I think it reminds us to be resilient.
Oh, yeah.
Is she Canadian, by the way? I forgot.
She's Canadian. She's from Ottawa. She's
Boom.
from the 613 area code.
Baby. It's all coming together. It's all coming together.
Oh, man, this is getting weird. Okay.
Fabulous.
So what's the last thing that made you laugh?
I'm sorry, what made me laugh?
What's the last thing that made you laugh?
What we just talked about. The fact that
Okay.
Alanis Morissette is from Ottawa, and I picked her song. That just cracks me up.
Okay.
And the 613. It's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. So on maybe a slightly more serious note, what's a question that you'd like to leave for a future guest?
Oh, simple. Do you worry about money? And if so, why? Unpack that.
Oh, man.
Do some reflection. Let's go to that. Let's start with ourselves. Look in the mirror, and let's get over the fear of talking about it, the fear of thinking about it, and then from there we can expand that to our loved ones.
Love it. So inspired. Dan, we have a prior guest who's left one question for you, and that question is this: have you done any good today?
I did, because I told my wife I'd take her out for dinner tonight, and she just was like, "Oh my gosh, what a great idea!"
That's perfect. Well, and we know you're going to make an income statement while you're out.
I will figure out whether they make money while I'm sitting there.
Oh, Dan, what a joy! Really, you've given, and I would say that when your question comes up, if you're worried about money, why? I might tell if they say yes, I might tell them to listen to this episode, because Dan, you've given us beautiful, beautiful nuggets of wisdom, some amazing things to take with us. Will you please let our listeners know, where could they find you if they wanted to follow you, learn more about your company?
Yeah,
where can they find you?
Yeah, trinityinvestors.com. We've got a pretty active website. We also have a LinkedIn page. That would be the best. I mean, I want people to advocate for financial literacy and just thinking more about it. So, TrinityInvestors.com is fine. But back to your point, Psychology of Money, man, read that book. If you're worried about money, read that book and you will worry about it less.
That's what we want. Make more memories. Make more memories. Seek out those opportunities. Dan, we cannot thank you enough. And to all of our listeners, thank you for being here. If resilience is something that you care about and you're looking for, we ask that you please like the episode you're listening to. Give us a subscribe on YouTube. Every one of those helps us to keep this resilience momentum moving forward. Resiliency The Podcast is the place to find stories and strategies and inspiration on how to embrace change and overcome challenges and redefine resilience in today's ever-evolving world. As always, I'm Jenn Quader. You can find me online at Jenn Quader, JENNQUADER, on all the socials. You can find me at JennQuader.com and with my company, thesmartagency.com. And then our wonderful Dr. Kelly Culver, very near the 613 in Canada. You can reach her at theculvergroup.ca. Again, that's .ca for Canada. Also at Dr. Kelly Culver on LinkedIn and Instagram. Guys, it is our pleasure and our honor to talk resiliency today and to share all of that with you. We invite you listeners to keep listening. In the meantime, stay resilient, be strong. We love you guys. Have a great day.